Welcome to the Component Bank tutorial. I will be showing you everything you need to know in order to use the system. So as a brief overview to the system, you have a form for the administrator as well as a form for the student. This is the form for the student and this is the form for the administrator. You also have a backend as well as a front-end database. The front-end database is the database that the student can see, and the back-end database is the administrator's database. So the difference you can see if I go between the two, the administrator database has sensitive information such as the reservation date as well as the student that has reserved a certain component. The differences is also that the student can only see the different categories of components, and the administrator has these two forms which are linked to the forms of the administrator as well as the student. And you have quantity reservations. These are reservations that a student has made in quantities, and as well this sheet shows all of the components that has been loaned out to students. The Preferences tab holds variables that will affect how the component bank functions. And finally, we can see that the backups are made within the backups folder, and it is made daily. So the first thing that needs to be understood is that components can exist either in quantities or as a single item. So components that exist in quantities are usually components that are very cheap, such as resistors and capacitors. And components that exist as single items will have available or reserved in its availability column. Components that exist as single items are usually expensive, such as FPGAs or microcontrollers. So let us start from the experience of the student. The student can pick out a component he or she would like. Let's say, for instance, component number 371. He can then enter his student number as well as the ID of the component. Because the component doesn't exist as a quantity, this field can be left blank and it can be submitted. As we will see, 371 will become reserved. In the backend, we can see that the student number is the one we typed as well as the date it was reserved. A reservation email will also be sent to the student's email by using the student number that the student has provided. The student can then show this email with his phone to the component bank administrator in order to simplify the process. An email is also sent to the component bank administrator showing that the component has been reserved, showing the component ID as well as the student number and the type of component. Reserving a quantity is done in much the same way. Let's say, for instance, we want to reserve 24 units of component ID 16. We can enter our student number, component ID 16 and 24. This means that 10 units should be left after the reservation. So you can see it's 10 units and it is shifted to the quantity reservation section. The ID starts with the component ID 16, but it's also appended with letters that makes the reservation unique should someone else also wish to reserve a quantity from component ID 16. This unique combination of letters comes from the preferences and it counts up through the alphabet. So let's say, for instance, if it was ZZ, it will start over at AAA and increases indefinitely. So let's make another reservation of component 46, let's say 50. And it should be 50 after the reservation. We will then see that 50 units has been reserved and it is ID ZZ, and the preferences will then start at AAA. So now we move on to the features of the administrator. First of all, the administrator can loan out a component to a student. For instance, the student will show this reservation email with his phone to the administrator, component ID 371, student number. He can specify a return date, how long he would like to loan the component. And it's not a quantity, so you can just submit. We'll see that this reserved has moved to the loan component section with all the details and the student number and the date to return. Learning out the quantity is done much the same way. If the student shows this email, 46ZZ, 46ZZ, student number, date, and the quantity is 50. You don't have to exactly type the correct quantity that the student reserved originally. Let's say, for instance, the student wants 40. That means that 46 over here will be 60 to compensate for the 10 units less that he wants to loan out. So if we say 40, this will become 60. And we'll show 40 here. If the time has expired that a student wished to loan a component, he will get an email that looks like this. So the administrator can say return a component from the student, and we can see that it is 46ZZ, 46ZZ, and the quantity is 40. So this will then move back to the resistor section and it's back to 100, from 60 to 100. Returning a component that doesn't have a quantity is done in, yet again, much the same way. You can enter the ID 371 and has no quantity, so you just leave it blank. It's a microcontroller, so you go to the microcontroller section and it's appended at the bottom. Unreserving a component is simple. Just have to get the correct ID. So for instance, 16AH. 16AH. 24 goes to 16 and it's back to 34. It was 10. Let's make a reservation of 369. It's also reserved. And now we can unreserve a component. So the component ID is 369 and it's unreserved. Adding a new component is as simple as choosing the type of component, setting the part number, additional information, and whether it's a quantity or not. Let's say there is 10, then we will see it appended at the bottom here, 10. If you don't submit a quantity, it will assume it's a single item. And it will show available instead of a quantity. Stocking up on a component can only be done with components that exist in quantities, such as, let's say, component 83. We want to add 50, then it will become 60. Removing a component will completely remove a component from the database. That means it can also be used to give a component away to a student without expecting the student to bring it back. So it won't be in the loaned sheet. So let's say, for instance, we want to remove 372. Just say 372. And it will be completely removed. You can also remove quantities. So let's say, for instance, we want to remove 46 from 41. So you say component 41 and 46. So it won't remove the entire row, it just reduced the quantity. But if you don't supply a quantity, it will remove a component that has a quantity. So let's say, again, 41, and we don't supply a quantity. Now that whole row will be removed. And 41 is gone. Adding a category is very straightforward. Just say the name of the category, submit, and you will see that the new category is a new sheet created. It's also on the front end. Removing a category is very simple. Just choose the category. This new inductor category can be removed. It's deleted from the back end as well as the front end. You can set the preferences by going to the preferences. Days before a reservation automatically expires, that is when a student reserves a component, how long will the component stay reserved after it automatically expires? Let's say 20 days. days between email reminders to return overdue components. So once a component is overdue, a student will be sent an email reminding him or her to return the component, and he will also be reminded every, let's say for instance, 15 days with a reminder email to return the component, and it will repeat forever. Adding a new administrator email. So when you add a new administrator email, this new email will also receive emails that all administrators receive. So for instance, so we will now see 2015 and the new email in the preferences sheet. 2015 and hello there at gmail.com. Naturally, sometimes we would like to make a manual modification to the database. So what we can do is go to the back end. Let's say for instance, we want to, for whatever reason, reserve all these, and we want to reserve some more here and change quantities. If we want to update the front end, all we have to do is just say update front end. So let's say for instance microcontroller. If we submit, all our manual changes will be reflected in the front end. So if there's anything that you can't do through the forms, you can do it manually and just update the front end. A quick tip for your OCD people that also recognize that the colors of the cells were also copied. You just go to the format, alternating colors, remove alternating colors, and just bring it back again. Ta-da! Some closing remarks. We found out that if two people enter a component into the database roughly the same time, it might give out the same ID. There's some parallel processing happening on the Google servers. So I set in place a daily check that would see if there is duplicates of IDs. So every day it will check for duplicates. Now I purposefully put in duplicates to show how this works. So an email is sent that says duplicates found in a database. So component ID 350 was in capacitor and resistor and microcontroller. 84 capacitor and microcontroller. So for instance 350, we can say, we go to the administrator and we say 350. Now you can see where it is. It is in microcontroller as well as capacitor naturally and resistor. Same for 84. So we just say 84 and it is in microcontroller and capacitor as mentioned by the email. So to fix the duplicates, all you would have to do is keep 1 at 84 for instance, and this number is different because I copied from the database we made at the university. So this will be the highest number and it will be the next component's ID. So let's say for instance it would be 600. So what you would do is you would take this number 600 and you would enter it for the new ID of the component, and you would write it obviously on the packet or the component, and you would have to manually just increase this by 601. Okay, so for instance the other one, which is 350, we can find it, we can keep this one as 350 and we can say this one is 601, this one is 602, and then we can write it on the component packets and we can say that the new highest number is 603, and that is it. The other thing that I would like to bring your attention to is that you need to keep these component categories in the same order as the front end, because it loops through the sheet numbers and not by name. So don't move these sheets around, for instance like that. Just bring it back again in the same order as the front end. The final thing that I'll bring your attention to is if you want to duplicate the system, all you will have to do is change these values. So it's, for instance, the backup folder ID is this backup folder. If you copy this whole component bank folder, this backup folder will have a new ID, but it's this ID over here, 1DT. You'll see it's here, 1DT. Main folder is just this folder's ID, so it's 1QE 1QE, same there. So the front end ID is just the front end database ID, says 1OR, as you can see, 1OR. Backend ID, same, 1QXT, 1QXT. The administrator form ID is just this form's ID, 1DVR, 1DVR. Student form ID is just this form ID, so it is 1CAK, 1CAK. The final link is the link to the front-end database for the student to view the database, but he can't edit the database, and this link will then be displayed over here. Okay, so the real final thing I'm going to show you is how you restore a backup. So, for instance, if we open the administrator database, we go to Tools, Script Editor. So over here by the triggers, we can see the daily trigger as well as the form submitted trigger. So we just need to recreate these two triggers among other things. So first of all, we go to the backups. We choose a backup we want. Let's say the newest one. We make a copy of it. Now upon making a copy, it will also make two forms that's attached to it, but don't worry about that, just delete it. Now we can move this copy back to the current version. Move. Now we can delete the old spreadsheet. Now I can rename this one to the spreadsheet's name. Component bank administration, spreadsheet, delete the rest. Now we open the spreadsheet. Go to Tools, Script Editor. Triggers. Now we need to put the triggers back, so we say add a trigger. So the first trigger is for the form submission, so we just choose the form submitted function. We say from spreadsheet and on form submit. Save. Now you need to enable your pop-ups. So I'm going to remove that. And do it once again. Save. Advanced, go to CBA project, allow. So now we just need to add the daily trigger. So we go to daily trigger. We say it's a time-driven trigger and it is a day timer, and we can say it runs at midnight. So we save it. And now you're done with the triggers. Link the forms back to the new spreadsheet. So we go to the administration. We go to responses. We unlink the form. And we select the response destination. Existing spreadsheet. Component bank administration. We go back to the component bank reservation spreadsheet. Responses, unlink form, and then select response destination, component bank administration spreadsheet. So now we have the two new linked forms. We just need to unlink the old ones. Say unlink form, as well as here unlink form. So now we just need to rename, copy this. And now we can see the columns corresponds with this form here. And we can delete it. This one, rename, copy it. Corresponds with this one, rename, paste it. Delete this one. Now I can make it look good again, make it bold. Choose everything, format, alternating colors. This one, make it bold. format, alternating color. And the final check you need to do is to see that these values correspond with the forms and the spreadsheet IDs. So naturally the new spreadsheet we made would have a new ID. So we can just go over here, get this ID here, copy it, paste it at backend ID. So you can see it changed. So just save it and you're done. So just to see that it works, we can go to the administrator, we can add a new component, microcontroller, and it's here. After updating the front end, we can see that microcontroller, back end and the front end are the same.